Hey there, welcome to my channel. I'm Erin, and today I wanted to take you on the journey of what I do every week with some raw milk that we get from a local farm. So we used to be dairy farmers, and I kind of miss the raw milk and everything that I could do with it, like kefir, butter, yogurt. There's so many fun things, even farmer's cheese that you can make with the milk. But I don't want to waste the precious cream. And so if you've never skimmed milk before, of the cream, when you're buying a whole milk, I'll show you how you can do this really easily with a cream separator. So if you look here at the jugs, you can see this line right here. So this milk was from Tuesday and today is Thursday. And so I let it sit just because I didn't have the time. But you can see how the cream floated to the top. Now you could just take a spoon and you could scoop off the milk in a mixing bowl, and then you could whip it into butter. But I have found a machine that does it super easy. And once the milk is heated up, then I go and turn it into yogurt. So first things first, I'm going to go ahead and get some hot water started because you're going to run hot water through this cream separator first. Next, we're going to start heating up a gallon of milk to 100 degrees. I just use a candy thermometer to watch the temperature. And I like to give the milk a good shake to try to get some of that cream off the top, because it does like to stick to the lid. So now to put together the cream separator. So this one is an electrical one. So there's lots of pieces to it, and don't hesitate to keep your guide handy to make sure that you get all of your pieces lined up in the exact way that they should go. And one thing I like to check before I put this one on, and it comes with a little tool, but I sometimes have to use a butter knife. So there's a little fitting here on the front, and this is what determines how much cream is being separated through this as it comes through the creamer. So I go all the way to the right and make sure it's tight. And then I do half of a turn the other way. And this varies every time that I use this. And so I just want to make sure that I'm not getting too much milk, but that I'm getting a good amount of cream out of the milk. So then we just pop that one into place, make sure it falls down. And it should have, when you have it in place, it should have a nice snug fit. Then you're going to put this dome on. Then you're going to put on the next separator. Then you're going to put on the big piece. Then we're going to put on this one. Sits in there. Then you've got a little baffle. And then you've got the big piece. And then this little guy turns on and off the valve, letting your cream come out. So now I'm going to go ahead and get my bowls under there. And so once my water reaches almost boiling, we're going to go ahead and run that through it, make sure everything is nice and clean, and then we'll start separating the milk. Our water's hot enough to pour in here. So you want to make sure that your valve is closed, turn it on, let the motor get running before you actually pour anything in there. This is a good way to check too if you have your cream versus milk, because I've done that a time or two where I accidentally, had the wrong bowl underneath. Okay, so it sounds like it's running full speed. So now we're going to start slowly turning this open. This one's pouring out a lot faster, so that's going to be your milk. And this one, you can see it's dripping out a little slower, so this one's going to be your cream. And then once it's done pouring out, we'll go ahead and pour our milk in because it should be to 100 degrees. So my milk is now almost at 100 degrees. I'm going to go ahead and just leave the motor running, pour off the water. I'm just going to take this off and pour this extra water off, because not all of it always drains out. And I've got my valve closed. Now let's pour in the milk. Past times that I've done this, it is actually coming out quite thick. So that probably means I may have turned it a tad too much. So when I go to make my butter out of this cream, it might have a little bit more extra whey in it than what I would typically have with a nice thick cream. The other thing I also noticed is the milk actually has a foam on top from the separation process. So you'll notice that when I go to pour that in for my yogurt. While this finishes separating, I'm going to go ahead and get my other 2 jars in the pot to start warming up. So you can see here now, we've got about 3 1/3 cups of cream, and the bowl is full from this 1 gallon of milk. You can see there's not much left in there, and we're not quite to 100 degrees on the other pot. So I'm going to go ahead and shut this down and let it settle until that milk has reached 100. And then we're going to go ahead and do that with the next batch. And then this milk, I'm going to pour back into the jars, as I need to put it somewhere until I'm ready to heat it up to the 185 degrees to make yogurt. So the cream, I'm actually going to go ahead and pour into my cooled mixing bowl. I actually had it in the freezer for about the last half hour, just because I need to cool the cream down in order to make butter. Now we're ready for batch number 2. Now to try to do this without making a mess. And if you watch, you'll notice the foam. Whoop. Isn't that weird? So now this is going to now, while that is separating, we're going to turn our burner back on. We're going to pour in the milk that we just filtered. And this is going to be for our yogurt. Now you would get a thicker, creamier yogurt if you chose to not separate out the cream. But I like the idea when I buy the milk to be able to make butter, yogurt, cheeses, and use it for other things. And for supper, I'm going to make a homemade tomato soup using some of the milk that's going to be left from this other one. And our milk right now is at 150. So while I'm making this up, we can keep an eye on that for the yogurt. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my burner on. I'm going to make a double batch because if I have extra soup tomorrow, I'll tell you about some fun ways that I like to add more things to it to make it an even more fun soup. So we're going to start off with about a 1/2 cup of butter. You could use fresh onions for this next part, but because I've been doing a lot more freeze drying, I'm going to go ahead and use freeze dried caramelized onions, which I think are going to give it an even more fun flavor. And I'm just going to guess, because it does say a small onion. So, you know, if that was 1 onion, 2 onions. If you want a little bit more of a garlicky, I actually harvested some wild leeks this last spring and freeze dried them. I'm going to add a little freeze-dried garlic. And then from some fresh celery that I grew, I'm going to add some freeze-dried celery. Now this may be too many vegetable fibers for some of you. You can use an immersion blender to blend it up into the milk once we're to that point. So I'm going to go ahead and let that soak up the butter, let it kind of soak in and toast a little bit. And I got our ½ cup of flour that we're going to sprinkle in here, and that's also going to help thicken up your soup a little bit. And for flour, I use a heritage blend that I know has been like tested for heavy metals, is non-GMO. It's just easier for those that have a hard time digesting that gluten. So we're going to sprinkle that in there. I'm not going to do the full ½ cup because I'm using so much freeze-dried stuff. As it is, I'm going to have to add extra water. So I'm going to mix that in. Let it soak up the rest of that butter. And I also want to say a special thank you to this brand with the Dutch oven. They sent me this to do some reviews on it and some videos on it. And so I am loving cooking in this Dutch oven. So now I'm going to go ahead and add my water. I have some chicken broth. I'm going to do 2 tablespoons. You could do more, depends on how much it may be lacking in flavor. But I figure I'll start with a light base first. Okay, we've got that. Now I'm going to go ahead and add an entire ½ gallon of freeze-dried tomatoes. And these are just some tomatoes I grew this year, and I just threw them through the blender and then poured them on my freeze dryer trays and freeze dried them. I did can some, but I like having freeze-dried tomatoes on hand too if it's things that I don't want necessarily really watery. And I like that the freeze drying kind of helps hold the flavor. So now we're also going to be adding the 4 cups of milk to this, but I just wanted to give this a chance to let the flavors. Okay, we are at 175, 180. So in about 5 minutes, we'll be shutting off the yogurt. Okay, we're at 185. I'm going to go ahead and take this off the heat for a minute. Doesn't need to get any warmer. So we actually have to cool the yogurt now down to 105. And I'll show you how I kind of speed up that process. But because I need about 4 cups of milk, I'm going to go ahead and just scoop it in there. I'm going to bring, oops, made a mess on the stove. Go ahead and mix that in. I'm going to serve this with some grilled cheese. I made some ricotta cheese last week with the leftover milk. So I might do some grilled cheese with some of that ricotta cheese in there. Oh, it smells so good. Now you could definitely season this more with marjoram, thyme, oregano. Just depends on what flavors. Basil is a favorite of mine. I freeze dried a lot of basil this last year. It's again for the soup that if there was some of this left over tomorrow, I would be adding quinoa and basil to it. If I had some spinach on hand, some fresh spinach, I would throw some fresh spinach in there. It just makes a really yummy Italian soup. But we're going to go ahead and let this simmer now, and then once it gets a little thicker, then I'm going to go ahead and just shut it down for supper, and then I'm going to go ahead and run the immersion blender through here, grind it all up, and then we'll have that nice, thick, creamy soup. But for now, I'm just going to cover it, turn it to low, let it simmer a little bit. And now let's separate this into jars for our yogurt. For the homemade yogurt, all you need is your milk cooled to 105, and you're going to need a tablespoon of Greek yogurt that has live microbes in it. And so this is some homemade stuff that I made last week, and it's nice and firm, so I know that it is got some good live bacteria in there. And I find that the measuring cup is a little bit faster than using a ladle, but obviously if you're doing smaller jars, that's totally fine. And even once this cools, if you want to go over it with a fork and kind of skim off any of that milk that might, you know, have that layer on it. And then what I like to do with the yogurts is add freeze-dried fruit to them, some chia seeds or hemp seeds, some nuts. It's really fun. I'll put them inside my crepes when I make homemade crepes. All right, now we'll just watch this. And when it looks like they're all down to 105, separate them out a little bit. Then we'll add our tablespoon of live cultured yogurt. And then these can sit out on the counter with a cover on them for the next 24 hours until they get nice and thick like this one. And you can see it because it's like jelly in there. It's so cool. So I think with the rest of the milk that I had left after making the soup, I'm going to go ahead and pour that back in our pot. Seeing as our yogurt is still at 150 degrees, I'm going to go ahead and bring my thermometer over here. We're going to heat this milk up to 200 degrees, and we're going to make some ricotta cheese. So I want to make some homemade ravioli and some lasagna. So I'm like, you know what? I could actually use some more ricotta cheese. So with the ricotta cheese, we're going to heat it to 200, and then we're going to add lemon juice to it, and that's going to help curdle it and make it into ricotta cheese. While we wait for the milk to get to 200 degrees, I have roughly about 12 cups of milk in there that's left. So I'm going to do a little over 1/3 of a cup of lemon juice. And you can always add more if it doesn't look like it's curdling. And then about a heaping teaspoon of salt. We're going to go ahead and mix that up and make sure, you know, as much of that salt is mixed in as possible. And then when it reaches 200 degrees, we can go ahead and pour this in. So I had a mild boil over, got distracted. I got to 205 and my milk actually boiled up to the top of my kettle. So watch your thermometer really close as you get closer to 200. So now that this is cooling down a little bit, and I don't think it burned to the bottom, now we're going to go ahead and add our lemon juice and salt mixture and watch the magic happen. So then let it sit there for about 10 minutes. Let it do its thing. I'm going to go ahead and pull this out. Now this is where after a little bit you're looking at it and you're like, it's not quite separating enough. This is where you can just pour in a little bit more lemon juice. And because, like I said, I had extra milk in there based upon the recipe, now I can see it where you're starting to get clumps and the whey is actually separating from the curd. So now when I stir it, you can actually see it. So we'll let it sit for a little bit. Let that lemon juice do its thing. You can see how it's already turning into curd. Now to go ahead and separate it. Now you can let that sit for a bit to drain off, but I found that, you know, it drains off pretty well. And so, but I don't want it to be too dry. So I'm going to go ahead and just pour this into my container. And if there's too much liquid, I can always pour it off. With the whey, I actually like throwing that in my garden out back. So I'll let this cool off a little bit and then I'll go take it outside and pour it in the garden. And here you have your ricotta cheese from that 12 cups. And so here's where I was like, if you want to, you can pour off some of that extra. And if you would like, you can even squish this. You can grind it up, but now it's ready for Italian cookies or ravioli or spaghetti, lasagna, anything where you want to add a soft cheese. We have finally waited long enough. It is now at 105 degrees, so I'm going to go ahead and pull that out. And I've got my yogurt here that I made last week, and I'm going to go ahead and just put about a good chunk in there. I like to do about a tablespoon. And again, if you don't have any homemade yogurt already, you can pick up a whole milk yogurt. Just look in the ingredients for active or live cultures. And then go ahead and give that all a little stir. Now you can speed up this process by putting them in a crock pot and leaving it on warm. However, my crock pot will not hold 8 jars. It only holds 5. So last week, instead of doing the crock pot method, I just left it on the counter in my pantry where my freeze dryer is going because it always stays really warm in there. And just put a towel over it, and by morning or in that 24-hour time frame, it was already all, you know, solid and coagulated. In fact, I actually forgot it because we had a Christmas party and I remembered the next morning. So it had actually been out on my counter for 36 hours and it's a little sour. But the nice part is now that you've got your base yogurt, you can add honey if you want to sweeten it. And you can add the fruits and the nuts and the chia seeds and the different things like that to make it a more wholesome, yummy treat. So there you have it. In 2 hours time, I separated 2 gallons of milk. I made 8 pints of yogurt. I made about 1.5 cups of ricotta cheese. I have a tomato soup started with some of the leftover milk, and my butter is currently still cooling to get cold enough to turn into butter. But my experience has shown that 2 gallons will turn into 1 pound of unsalted, very yummy butter. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like videos like this, make sure to subscribe. Leave me a comment below if you've made yogurt or cheese or what you like to do if you have whole milk at home, and if you're going to try any of these recipes.